I have to agree with Melissa. The read of the Phoenix Project book is fascinating. And I'm only actually just getting around to it now, even though I've talked about it for a long time. So it's interesting. So let me go ahead and jump into my talk here. So, and just before I start here, I use the term in this, my disability, the dilemma to disclose. I don't particularly like the term disability, but I'm going to explain why I use that term, and you'll understand why. So first of all, who am I? Well, for some of you already know me. I'm Robin Horton. I'm a senior SRE at Zillow Group. I've been in numerous industries: telecommunications, education, a lot of internet services companies. Just been doing tech for a long time, right? And this has grown over time, where even before the pandemic, I was involved in I was working remotely. And I seem to have been a recipient of the poor genetics lottery, because unfortunately, I was having some health issues even before the pandemic. But one of the things that was interesting about my challenges was that I went to the doctor. They had a full workup, cardiologist, neurologist, and they said, you know, you're fine. There's really nothing wrong with you. But as the pandemic went along, the quality of my work declined. I was having some really, really serious cognitive impairment. Had to take a nap every day. I was feeling really thirsty all the time. I couldn't sleep at night. It got really, really bad. And at the time, I was trying to cope with being able to do my job and being able to take care of my family. But, you know, at this point, when the quality of your work goes down and you're not doing well, then, you know, you start to feel that self-worth of declining, right? And so you really don't feel good. So that's why I'm talking about this, is because it's a challenge that I faced. You might even liken it to the book Flowers for Algernon, or some of you might have seen the movie Charlie, where he starts out with struggles, he starts doing really well, and then he kind of reverts back to that state. Well, in my case, it's the opposite. I started out, I was doing really well, and then really struggled for a while, and then things started to get better. And you see, in October 2020, I went to the doctor and they told me, yes, you definitely have diabetes. And so made a whole bunch of changes and was able to really improve my situation. But, you know, the questions that came up during that time, they were totally relevant, especially when it comes to remote work, is, you know, what do you do when you need to disclose your disability, right? And diabetes is considered a disability. I wouldn't have said that, or I would have questioned that before suffering the consequences of that. But after experiencing it firsthand, I realized, yes, most definitely when it comes to the cognitive impairment, the actual lack of sleep, it's really rough. So I really feel for people that are suffering through these conditions. So, and what is this about? Well, people, they have it really, really hard. Some of the people that we work with suffer from mental illnesses. Some have physical limitations that we may or may not know about. Some of them have conditions that we can't even imagine what they're going through, right? And so when I use that term disability, I'm using the very narrow legal perspective of the word disability. And also we'll talk a little bit about the ADA, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act. By the way, the ADA was written and came into effect in 1990, and some of those protections were before 1990. But, you know, this is one thing, is that the ADA it was written to fulfill the needs of a certain set of people. And we're going to talk a little bit about, does the ADA even really help people in technology? And this talk, by the way, this isn't going to offer like some magical solution. It's just going to offer some perspective and maybe perhaps some suggestions on how we can cope with our disability. We can look at possible solutions to help others with their disability, and really hopefully make our work a better place. So we may know that we have a disability, but we may not, right? Just like I mentioned before, we might be suffering the actual effects of a disability and not recognize it. And when this comes to, really it can affect anyone, because we may be going through our daily work and not realize that, hey, our coworker, they're going through major depression. And maybe they didn't always have that. Maybe it's a condition that they've acquired over time. And just kind of give you some perspective. I mean, now a lot of us are working remotely, right? And so we might not see some of those signs, those warning signs that people have when they're going through a tough crisis, a health crisis, perhaps. I'll give you an example. There was a study that was done on people that suffered from COVID-19. And it was actually quite a big study, and it was done in 2020. And what happened was they found that when it came to cognition, that those people that had suffered from COVID-19 had a significant drop in cognition. I think they had measured it by 7 IQ points. It was really substantial, right? So these are people that we work with daily. It might even be us, right? And we know that in this case, disability, that counts. It's a physical or a mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. In this case, our job, it's very challenging. And this is the other thing is, should I keep my disability a secret, right? You are going to get some limited legal protection from the ADA and from some other laws that are in place. But once you disclose, then you face something completely different. You face bias in the workplace. And so I'm just going to clarify right now, I am not a lawyer. So you may want to consult with legal counsel, and they will review some of the protections that you do have through the ADA. The ADA is meant to protect employees. And we also can recognize that the ADA, it's very limited in scope. Much of the ADA focuses on physical labor or a physical job. And when you roll into tech, those protections get really kind of fuzzy and really hard to enforce. And these laws, they aren't going to change people's thinking. They will give you protection, though, to a limited degree. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And the other thing is, once we do disclose that we have a disability, then that bias is going to affect whoever that we talk to. So we have to decide, how are we going to disclose this? And that is especially the case where you want to talk to legal counsel, because who you disclose to affects the protections that you get. So, there was someone else in the past that suffered from a disability and faced that same dilemma. If you go to the FDR library, Franklin D. Roosevelt Library, he faced that same dilemma with his polio. And you may have known that polio was something that he acquired over his lifetime. He wasn't born with it. So, and it really was something that could have stopped him from re-entering politics. But one of the things that was interesting, if you look at that FDR library, It says, this was a quote that was from that library. It says, FDR requested that the press avoid photographing him walking, maneuvering, or being transferred from his car. The stipulation was accepted by most reporters and photographers, but periodically someone would not comply. The Secret Service was assigned to purposely interfere with anyone who tried to snap a photo of FDR in a disabled or weak state. Yes, he was trying to manage his image within the media, right? And we kind of face that same challenge because we're trying to manage how people see us in a technical role. And we don't have full control over that, but we can kind of look and see what are some areas that maybe I can be selective as to who I share my disability with. And what is it that makes this field especially hard? Maybe if you could tell me, each of you, the company that you currently work at, could you tell me all the aspects of the major services that your company runs? Most of you would have a difficult time. You would say, well, I know some of the major services we provide. Very few, probably maybe 2 or 3 people can go in depth on every service that your company provides. I know for Zillow, I could never manage to do that because there's just so many different products that are offered, so many different business units. It would be overwhelming, right? But more than just being intellectually overwhelming, our environments can be mentally and emotionally taxing because we're dealing with project managers, business folks. We're dealing with people that have deadlines. And, you know, this is an environment, especially now that most of us are remote, there's not where your boss can simply take you out to lunch and like, hey, let's try to help you out. We can't just sit down in a conference room together and talk about it. And that's really where it really makes a challenge clear, is that what action can you take when you're remote? And I'll give you an example of this. Someone who works remote, when their coworkers go back to the office, that one person that's remote is feeling some feelings of paranoia, and they feel like they're being left out of the conversations that are taking place in the office. Now, somebody who has a legitimate mental illness, that's a major concern for them. And it may actually be happening in reality, but what can we do? What can we do to help these people in this situation? Well, there's a few things that we want to be really conscious of. In the classic sense of the system administration, there used to be this term, RTFM, read the effing manuals, right? Now, I'm not saying don't ever tell someone to look at documentation, but what I am saying is what you need to do is when someone is given documentation, you have to actually ask them, do you understand this documentation? Because some people don't consume written documentation very well. They are having a rough time as it is, and sometimes they need just a primer, some sort of introduction to the material, maybe just a little bit of hand-holding at first. Another thing that we want to avoid is this thinking that our time is worth more than theirs. There are a lot of situations where maybe as a senior SRE or as a senior developer, just someone who has more experience, that we're going to think, well, they can learn that on their own time. Well, really, my time is not worth more than yours. And we want to kind of get away from that thinking. Yes, there will be situations where only you can contribute to a solution of a problem, but we want to kind of purge that thinking from our minds. And also this thinking of it needed to be resolved quickly. Sometimes that excludes people from contributing to a solution. So sometimes there's a problem. Oh, I took care of it. I fixed it. Well, what was the solution? I took care of it, right? Well, the other people that want to know the solution, they could be contributing to the solving of that problem the next time it comes up, but we excluded them. So try not to do that. Try to just take your time and help people along the way. And the other thing is, as DevOps people, we're very often focused on being efficient, right? Of reducing the manual steps, right? But there's some people that like a certain number of manual steps. Maybe they, and I use the term cog, right? Because it's someone who's part of that machinery. They're okay with doing something over and over and over again. One of my previous coworkers called them a trucker, right? They just kind of do the same thing and they're happy with it, right? Some people are okay with that and other people's are not, right? They do not want to do the same thing over and over again. So, but you want to kind of keep that in mind, because we work with people that have different conditions. You might even think of someone who has somewhere on the autism spectrum disorder, that they may feel okay with doing things over and over again. And when you take away those steps, what are they left to do, right? So think about that when you're mentoring someone. There's also a talk by Tom Lemoncelli, Low Context DevOps. I know some of us have heard of this, but he talks about being able to help people get introduced to processes without a high level of context. And that helps a tremendous amount with people that are struggling. Maybe they're struggling with a mental illness or some sort of cognition problem, but this is going to help them a tremendous amount. And then we can also look at ways we can help ourselves. So you may choose to disclose your condition to someone. And in this case, again, you may want to talk to a legal counsel before disclosing this to your company. But one of the things that you may want to do is you may want to actually advocate for yourself. Advocate for your perspective. Now, I'm going to caveat that with the next point about recognizing your limitations. So many times nowadays we're told you can do anything. There is no limit to what you can do. And I'm not saying don't push yourself. I'm just saying recognize and have a realistic view of what you can and can't accomplish. If you suffer from a mental illness, then maybe challenging the entire company is not what you want to do. You have to realize that there are limitations to what I can accomplish on my own. And maybe you need to reach out and find someone that's going to help you be an advocate for yourself. And along those lines, you don't want to feel obligated to outperform. There's situations where you recognize that you have a disability. Other people will be viewing your work and you feel like you have to outdo everyone because you want to show them that you can do it. But don't feel obligated to do that. Don't feel like you have to be the best all the time, but also try to have just a sense of humor. Try to take it lightly, assume positive intent. And remember that very often when they show anger towards you, it's because they're afraid. They're afraid of something that we don't know about. So we really want to keep that in mind. And there's tons of other ways that we can help out, but these are just a few, right? Thank you very much for watching. There's my email, which if you want to reach me, I'm also on the DevOps Meetup Slack, so you can reach me there, or you can reach me on Twitter, and I probably won't check it because I don't check Twitter very often. But I just wanted to share also one other thing. A few years ago, I was at a DevOps Days meetup, and I was standing in line, and there was two people that were there, and struck up a conversation. They were super nice people. I ended up having lunch with them, and it actually really great conversation. One of them was speaking that morning, and her name was Dominica. Yeah, and it turns out her name was Dominica DeGrandis. She writes a book called Making Work Visible. And then the other person was this guy named Gene Kim, and I had never heard of him before. And yes, it's the same Gene Kim that wrote the Phoenix Project. So I ended up having lunch with them, and I didn't even know them. But it was a fascinating lunch I had with them, and I was really impressed. It was a real pleasant surprise. And so maybe someday I will meet one of you, and you will go on to be the next Gene Kim or Dominica DeGrandis. Thank you.